arrived around 8 a.m., they interrogated him as well. None of these confessions contained any talk at all about those hits of LSD, but that version would firmly become the story of the entire Greenlee family and its supporters by the time the trial commenced. Aaron's father worked offshore and was there when his wife was murdered. He went back home to Mississippi by the time his son returned on Saturday, and he wanted to speak to him, but the teen was too scared. The pair shared an emotional reunion on Sunday, although they did not discuss the murder. 3 days after Sheila was killed, he said, quote, "My son is 15 years old and he's never been in any trouble. We don't need to put him in the state penitentiary with hardened criminals. This is a bad thing, but that's my baby. I know he killed my wife, but he's still my baby and I love him." 36-year-old Sheila Greenlee was buried in the cemetery next to Olo Baptist Church, and her husband and daughter never returned to their Rocky Branch Road home. Aaron's trial began less than a year later, with his family having spent that time lobbying for an age-appropriate sentence for the teen. They heavily opposed his being tried as an adult and placed hefty weight on the alleged LSD. However, the prosecution contended that he targeted his mother for not letting him drive her van to the carnival. When his murder trial began 4 days after George Carley got 2 life sentences, psychiatrist Dr. Little was back, taking the stand to explain how she felt that Sheila's sleeping figure became incorporated into Aaron's bad acid trip. She felt that it was possible that after he retrieved the gun from the cabinet in his parents' room, he fired it without realizing he was murdering his mother. The defense was relying on a temporary insanity plea, pointing toward the acid even though intoxication was not a valid defense. Many in the community felt that he should see some leniency, with over 150 of his family members and 300 friends, neighbors, and community members signing petitions in support of a sentence less than life in the penitentiary in Parchman. Aaron took the stand in his own defense, attempting to explain away the omission of his use of LSD in all interrogations and confessions. His father was staunchly anti-drug, and he said he was afraid if he had told police about the LSD, his father would disown him. Police did not test him for drugs, but did mention at the time that he did not appear to be under the influence of anything. This episode is brought to you by Best Fiends. It's been a more stressful week than usual, and I found myself needing a bit of extra time to think about things other than crime, politics, and the pandemic. As a card-carrying grown-up, I know that I should stay up to date on all things current events, but man, is it exhausting. So last week, I made a valid effort to detach every day and dig into Best Fiends, the Play Anywhere puzzle game that I am still obsessed with. I've played other games that just got too difficult to enjoy, but after completing more than 600 levels of Best Fiends, it's actually still fun. The worst thing about Best Fiends is putting it down, so play away. There's always one more level, with more levels, events, and challenges added all the time. It has millions of 5-star reviews on the Apple App Store and Google Play, and is free to download with over 100 million downloads and counting. Download Best Fiends free today on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. Following 3 days of testimony, the jury left to deliberate, but after 3 hours, informed the judge that they were deadlocked at 11-1. He promptly sent a note to the jurors, which read, quote, "I know that it is possible for honest men and women to have honest different opinions about the facts of the case. But if it is possible to reconcile your differences of opinion and decide this case, then you should do so. Accordingly, I remind you that the court originally instructed you that the verdict of the jury must represent the considered judgment of each juror. It is your duty as jurors to consult with one another and to deliberate in view of reaching an agreement, if you can do so without violence to your individual judgment. Each of you must decide the case for yourself, but only after an impartial consideration of the evidence with your fellow jurors. In the course of your deliberations, do not hesitate to re-examine your own views and change your opinion if you're convinced it is erroneous. But do not surrender your honest convictions as to the weight or effect of the evidence solely because of the opinion of your fellow jurors or for the mere purpose of returning a verdict. Please continue your deliberations. The jurors were informed that any food or provisions needed to ensure quality deliberations could be supplied. However, after just over half an hour more, they came back with a unanimous verdict of guilty of murder. They had not been allowed to consider manslaughter. Aaron Greenlee was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 16. But the murder of Sheila Greenlee as the summer dawned was only the first of two shocking murders to rock the Olo Baptist Church and Sumrall Attendance Center families that summer. As Aaron Greenlee sat in Lamar County Jail for going on 3 months, his classmate and fellow congregation member Joshua Miller was about to join him. For 14-year-old Josh, it was girl trouble, and that girl was 13-year-old Kristen Aultman. Although she wasn't allowed to date, Kristen and Josh had dated but had broken up 10 months before. Now, in August of 1996, she had a new boyfriend, but that had not kept Josh from calling her house incessantly to win her back. Kristen was a deep child who wrote poems about being scared of Algebra 1 and about her feelings regarding those who hadn't yet found God, but she was a regular kid too, a cheerleader who played the flute in the band and sold snow cones with her father in the summer. On the evening of Sunday, August 18th, Josh told his mother that he would take the van to church and watch the nursery school kids in her place. Unlike the other parents we've talked about who didn't let their young teens drive without a license, Josh's mother said this was okay and was even relieved to get some extra time to rest before another grueling work week began. The Millers were close with the Aultman family, and at that morning's church service, the mothers had sat together as they often did. A friend would later say that Josh told him earlier that Sunday that he wanted to kill Kristen, though he would deny that it had ever happened. Her great-aunt would later refer to him as intensely infatuated, saying that Josh would call Kristen so much that she didn't even want to answer her incessantly ringing phone. Josh's mother was unaware of her son's true intention, which was to corner Kristen and make her talk to him. He took along the shotgun his father had given him and drove to the church, but when he arrived, there were too many people around. Once Kristen was done with her discipleship class, she joined her grandmother to wait for the evening service to begin, but excused herself to go outside and talk to Josh. He'd told her he wanted to show her something. As children played around them and teens shot hoops on the basketball court, Josh and Kristen spoke next to the Miller's van, which he had parked beneath the giant oak tree at the entrance to the church. Josh pleaded his case to an uninterested Kristen who told him in no uncertain terms that they wouldn't be getting back together, and it was then that he reached in and grabbed the shotgun that he claimed to have brought just to scare her. 13-year-old Kristen Aultman was shot and killed by a blast to the face right outside of her beloved church, whose steeple could be seen down the hill from her parents' body shop. Once he'd killed Kristen, Josh drove his mother's van toward a friend's house before wrecking it and continuing there on foot. When he arrived, his friend didn't believe him, and Josh started to walk back to the church when he was met by 2 Lamar County Sheriff's deputies. They asked if he happened to be Josh Miller, and he responded that yes, he was the one who shot her. They placed him under arrest, telling him what they were doing as they went along, to which he replied, quote, "Yes, I know because I shot her." They brought him to the sheriff's office and placed him in an interrogation room with nothing else, though 15 minutes later, Josh emerged with a note he said he had just written. It said, quote, "To police or anybody who cares. If you receive this from Joey, it probably means I already killed her. I loved her. She didn't love me. She hurt me. I couldn't take it. If she can't be mine, she can't be anybody's. I love God, but Satan has a hold of me. I love you, Mom. I love you, Joey, and all my family. What I have done is wrong. Forgive me." Josh was Mirandized for a second time when the formal investigators arrived and they questioned him again. After explaining that he'd committed the murder because of how deeply he'd been hurt by the breakup, he asked if he was going to hell. Kristen and Josh were some of the last children their community felt this situation would happen to. Murdered just weeks before her 14th birthday, the 8th grader loved cows and gravy and devoted time to writing a sci-fi novel. Church choir and dance classes she'd been taking since she was a toddler were a huge part of her life, as was Alanis Morissette music, Stephen King novels, and Nickelodeon's show Are You Afraid of the Dark? Josh played youth baseball and worked part-time in his aunt and uncle's drugstore after school some days, and classmates remember him as funny and not one to get into trouble. But the home life of Joshua Charles Miller had been, unsettling for at least half of his life, beginning for him around when his father left when he was 7. They had some contact, although he did not make an effort to engage or fully connect with his son, according to Josh's mother. And then she said that her second husband verbally abused Josh and that she routinely and explosively clashed with him as well as with her third husband, all in front of her son's impressionable eyes. She recounted him hearing her tell them multiple times that she was going to kill them. Josh's mother visited Kristen's mother at their home 2 days after the murder and was assured that there were no hard feelings. Mrs. Aultman stated to the press that she loved Kristen and she also loved Josh. The Aultmans had been married at that church and now their daughter had been killed there. Kristen Aultman was buried in the cemetery at the First Baptist Church of Olo, as is Sheila Greenlee. Pre-trial publicity ultimately led to a change of venue and the trial was moved to Canton, Mississippi in Madison County on June 30th, 1997. Trial began on July 2nd and within days, Joshua Miller had been found guilty of murder, though the jury had been instructed that manslaughter was also an option. When found guilty of murder, life without parole and a trip to the toughest prison in the state was the only recourse, no matter how young. He arrived at Unit 29 at Parchman on July 10, 1997, at the age of 15. He earned his GED at 17, but classes and programs were limited for lifers. Sometimes he'd break rules, but the guards figured that he did it to be placed in solitary confinement and away from the adult horrors in Gen Pop. It did appear that he actively tried to avoid gang affiliations or interactions, according to officials. The Mississippi Supreme Court upheld Josh's conviction in 1999, and in 2002 he filed a motion for post-conviction relief which was also denied. In 2013, he filed a motion to vacate based on Miller v. Alabama, which he updated following the Montgomery decision. Then, in May of 2016, the sentence was vacated, clearing the way for Josh's resentencing hearing. In preparation, the defense hired clinical forensic psychologist Chris Lott, who evaluated him on September 10th and 17th, 2017. The resentencing began in Lamar County on July 31st, 2018, with the hope being a sentence of life with the possibility of parole. Josh's mother took the stand to explain that after he came off Ritalin, he was just a different kid. He'd been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and prescribed the drug. However, 6 months before the murder, he'd been taken off of the medication by his doctor in February of 1996. She said, quote, "He started changing. He was always a good child. I never had to discipline him much. He had never been one to talk back to me or anything like that. It started there. His behavior changed." Like many mothers, she blamed the change in attitude and increase in aggression on hormones and puberty.